1993. Salvation. She was making her way through the dense thickets of an ancient forest. Branches of bushes and trees whipped her face, but she felt neither pain nor fatigue, even though she had been without sleep and food for more than a day. There was no end in sight. The same endless forest lay ahead. This was good, she thought. The forest offered more chances to escape her pursuers, who thirsted for her death. And those mean people would not leave her alone. Of course, she could easily deal with them despite their number being no less than 5. The adrenaline rush in her blood was so high that she could fight a bear, but her burden hindered her. She was not alone, carrying her newborn daughter wrapped in many blankets. The girl slept peacefully, unaware of the cruel world she had just entered. The young woman stopped, carefully laid the child on the ground, and listened. Her hearing, like her other senses, was excellent, far better than that of ordinary mortals. She bared her teeth, looking back into the forest depths, sharp fangs like razor blades peeking from the corners of her upper lip. She decided they could rest for a moment, as the enemies were about 3 miles away. She sat on the ground and looked lovingly at her daughter. The girl opened her eyes slightly and whimpered. "Hungry, my dear?" the woman whispered, unbuttoning the top buttons of her tattered sweater and beginning to nurse the baby. The girl eagerly latched onto her mother's nipple, and the woman smiled sweetly. But the moment of happiness was short-lived. Soon, dark memories brought her back to the recent past, and a grimace of desperate sorrow crossed her face like nightfall. They had killed her husband, those scoundrels chasing them. Her beloved had been brutally murdered. These people had appeared suddenly, just as they were sleeping. Her husband was the first to sense something was wrong and rushed out of the room to meet the killers. Moments later, she heard a blood-curdling scream as one of the intruders drove a wooden stake into his trembling heart. She hadn't seen them kill him, but felt his pain in her own heart. With incredible speed, she grabbed her baby daughter and escaped through the back door of their home. Thus began the chase by those human monsters. Later, she had a vision of their house burning. They had set it on fire with her slain husband inside. But why did these beasts do this? For what? Yes, she and her husband needed blood, but they never killed people, always managing with the blood of wild animals that were abundant in these areas. But they would answer for everything. And first and foremost, the priest. She was sure he was the organizer of all the evil inflicted upon her family. But it was time to leave. The pursuers were getting closer. Her daughter was already fed, which was the main thing. She only worried about how to protect her from these killers. The woman rose, pressed the child closer to herself, and continued on her way. Dusk was falling. In the forest, it was already quite dark. The tree canopies shielded her from the killing sunlight. But she was pleased that at night the pursuers would stop to rest, giving them a chance to rest too, and possibly for her to hunt. With every second, she felt her strength waning. She needed fresh young blood. And just as night took hold, and the full bewitching moon appeared in the sky, she suddenly smelled people. But not those who were chasing her. Other people were somewhere ahead on her path. Without a doubt, the forest ended there. After a moment's hesitation, she continued toward the human scent, and in it, she suddenly saw salvation for her own blood. Exiting the forest to the highway, the woman with the infant was in a state of complete exhaustion. A dense fog of fatigue clouded her vision. Smelling the people, she had bypassed the remaining forest path without resting. The sun had not yet risen, but she felt its approach. Nights in late May were short. Crossing the deserted road, the woman sped up. Now her path lay through a wheat field, and she knew that if she didn't reach a residential area by sunrise, she would die. But it took at least an hour before she saw the first house in her path. Passing by it, she understood that for her plan to work, she needed something more substantial. Somewhere far in the east, the sky was already filling with the blood-red dawn. And then she found what she was looking for. This house stood before her in all its glory. She was simply amazed by the sight. Having lived her entire life in a remote hamlet, she had never seen anything like it. A palace, that was her first thought. Indeed, this structure attracted the eye with its construction. A 2-story house with an attic, built in Gothic style from black stone, and in the light of nearby street lamps, it looked like some mythical creature. The house clearly belonged to wealthy people who could be trusted with her daughter. But most importantly, she felt that good people lived here who could fully care for her child. Walking around the high metal fence with small pointed spikes, the woman approached the main gate. On the mailbox, she read the owner's last name, Miles. The woman tried to open the gate, but it was locked. Gathering her last strength, she clumsily jumped over the fence, tearing the hem of her dress, and headed for the house. It was early morning, and the residents of the mansion were probably still asleep. This circumstance suited her just fine. She climbed the porch and, kneeling, placed her daughter on the mat in front of the front door. At this moment, the woman could not hold back, and a torrent of bitter tears burst from her eyes. Yes, she was saving her daughter, but she hadn't thought about how hard it would be to part with her. Parting forever. The first rays of the morning sun were already burning her face, and there was no time for long goodbyes. "Goodbye, my baby girl," the woman spoke as she covered the baby with kisses. "And I'm sorry you'll never know your real mother." Staggering, she rose from her knees, pressed the doorbell button, and fled in an unknown direction. 2010. Katie. If you had asked her on that spring Saturday morning if she knew where the happiest person in the world lived, she would have answered without hesitation. Yes, she did. And she would immediately have given the address. Sunnyvale, Maine, 5 Maple Avenue. And it was at this address that she had lived for 16 years. Katie stood by the window of her room on the 2nd floor, watching a kitten playing with the shadows of the trees. There hadn't been such a warm day in a long time. Early in the morning, the sky cleared of heavy clouds, and now the sun was giving its warmth to all living things. And how wonderful that such a beautiful day was the day her older brother Alex was coming home. At the thought of him, her slightly pale cheeks flushed with a light blush. She smiled slightly and sighed heavily. Where is he? Katie fumed. He promised to arrive by 10. Alex was studying literature at Harvard, and Katie often boasted to her friends about how smart her brother was, already in his 3rd year with good grades, which wasn't easy to do at such a prestigious institution. She loved to show off in front of her friends, as she was considered one of the prettiest girls at school. She knew that her big green eyes, pale face, and luxurious brown hair made her friends often call her a witch. But she wasn't offended. In fact, she was proud of it. But today, her gorgeous hair was tied in a ponytail with a blue silk ribbon that Alex had once given her for her birthday. She turned 5 then, but remembered that day as if it had happened only yesterday. The 9-year-old boy lifting his little sister, handing her the ribbon, and whispering in her ear, "Happy birthday, Katie. This is a magic ribbon. Keep it. And as long as you have it, you will always be under my protection." And although that little girl was long gone, she still believed his words. Her reverie was interrupted by the sight of a black sedan, a Ford Fusion, pulling into the central gates. She dashed out of the room, flew down the stairs in a second, and barely managed to stop before the front door after tripping over their sleeping spaniel, Roger. Roger lazily barked, and from the kitchen came her mother's joyful voice. "Judging by your sprint, I assume Alex is here?" Grace also came out to greet her son. She approached Katie and hugged her shoulders. "Mom, I'm sorry, but I'm so happy Alex could make it to our celebration." "We're all very happy about it, dear." The front door swung open, and there was Alex. Before he could say hello, Katie was already hanging on his neck, covering his face with light kisses. Dropping a large sports bag from his left hand, he hugged Katie around the waist and twirled her around the living room. Out of breath, he set her down. "Well, Katie, you're not the little feather you used to be. Hi." Alex took her young face in his hands and kissed her cheek gently. And then Katie felt a strange feeling inside herself. It was unlike simple sibling love. It was sharper and more greedy. She hated herself for these feelings, but she could do nothing about them. Sometimes they just came on their own. "Hi, Alex," she said, lightly stepping away from him, her cheeks now burning with a crimson fire. Alex looked slightly abashed, and she noticed he also seemed a bit embarrassed, as if he felt something too. But then Grace took center stage, hugging her son and doting on him as if he were a little mischievous boy, constantly repeating that he never listened to his mother. Alex fended off his mother's reproaches as best he could. Sometimes Katie helped, finding the scene very amusing. Eventually, Alex couldn't take it anymore and reminded his mother that he had just arrived, was incredibly hungry, and would prefer to continue this interrogation a bit later. Grace fell silent, looking puzzled first at her son and then at her daughter, and then suddenly burst out laughing. In a second, the children joined her infectious laughter. The weekend flew by unnoticed. Katie increasingly realized with sadness that Alex was no longer the same. He had grown up, and she remained the little sister, wanting him to give her as much attention as before. But time couldn't be stopped, let alone turned back. Evenings Alex spent with friends, returning home well past midnight, and during the day he either slept or lay in his bed sullen and silent. On Memorial Day, the family gathered around the festive table. Father Jonathan was off work that day too, and Katie was very pleased that on Alex's last day home they could all be together. Everyone joked and rejoiced. Grace and Katie were busy with the table, and usually lazy Roger kept circling around them, wagging his tail in the hope of getting something tasty. And when everything was finally ready, Jonathan, with a broad smile on his face, poured the liquor into glasses and solemnly made his signature toast. When it was Alex's turn, he awkwardly stood up, and looking around shyly, surprised everyone with his unexpected speech. "Dear Mom, sweet Kathy, I raise this glass, and since we are all gathered here together, I want to share some wonderful news with you. I haven't told you yet, but a year ago I met a wonderful girl in Boston. Her name is Mary. We love each other, and just recently we decided to get married." Katie nearly fainted. Her heart was pierced by an icy cold, and she felt a terrible hatred for this girl, Mary, whom she had never even seen. Unbearable jealousy grew within her by the second. Everything that happened next felt like a dream. Dad smiled strangely. Mom looked at her son with her mouth open, unable to utter a word, while Alex stared detachedly at everything, and when their eyes met, Katie couldn't take it, and bursting into tears, ran to her room. She only calmed down closer to the evening. Locked in her room, through her sobs, she heard Alex arguing with their parents. They tried to convince him not to rush into marriage, but he stood his ground firmly. And although this time Katie sided with her parents, she couldn't help but admire the determination with which Alex was fighting this battle. When the atmosphere in the house calmed down a bit, Mom and Dad tried to persuade Katie to open the door, but she didn't want to see anyone except Alex, and she waited for him, wanting to talk to him. She was sure that after talking to him, she would feel calm and peaceful. That's how it always was and should be, but he didn't come, didn't. And when the clock struck midnight, she suddenly found the strength to get out of bed. She increasingly noticed that at this time she seemed to become a different person, as if reborn. Trying not to make noise, she opened the door and stepped into the hallway. Alex's room was just a few steps from Katie's, and within seconds she was standing by his door, under which yellow light from a desk lamp streamed. In childhood, Alex had invented a special signal she should use when knocking on his door so he would immediately know it was her. She used it this time too, but there was no answer. She tried again. Silence. Maybe he's asleep, Katie thought, and without realizing it, turned the doorknob. Entering the room, she found him lying on the bed with his eyes closed. He was still in the same festive suit he had worn during the day. Katie sat on the edge of the bed, and just as she was about to wake Alex, she noticed a photograph sticking out of the front pocket of his pristine white shirt. Katie carefully pulled out the picture and looked at it closely. In it, among exotic plants, stood a slender tanned blonde with a sweet face. That's her. I hate her. Suddenly, Katie clearly saw the background of the photo fill with a crimson color. She dropped the photo in horror and immediately heard Alex's sleepy voice. "Katie? What are you doing here?" Alex, I need to talk to you." "If it's about Mary, then there's nothing to discuss. Are you really that serious about her?" "Yes, Katie, it's very serious. And I think we'll get married by the end of the summer." Katie felt the tears welling up in her eyes again, bitter tears of resentment. Alex took her hand, and in a moment, she found herself in his arms. He kissed her hair, and she decided to tell him about her nightmares. "Alex, I know I can trust you. We've always been honest with each other. But what I want to tell you now might seem very strange." She turned her face to him and looked into his eyes. And they once again convinced her that she could trust him with not only her life, but even something more. "I'm listening, Katie. And remember, everything you say will stay between us." "Okay, listen. Sometimes I feel like I'm becoming someone else. I don't even know when I first felt it. But it happens. I become more aggressive. I'm often tormented by depression. Life no longer seems as wonderful as before. And overall, I feel that something bad, very bad, is going to happen. I think you're just growing up. Believe me, this will pass soon. And what do you say about the dreams? I see in them some unknown woman beckoning me to her. And I float to her through the air, against my will. And when I get close enough to see her face, I suddenly recognize myself in her. Her hair is flowing, her eyes burn with a hellish fire, and her mouth is smeared with blood. And she prophesies, saying it's the blood of our enemies. None of us are safe from nightmares. But it's not a nightmare. I understand it sounds unbelievable, but you have to believe me. It's not even like a dream. It's as if everything is happening in reality. But the worst part is that I see this every night. Alex, help me. I'm so scared." He held her tighter and whispered in her ear that he loved her and would protect her from all the nightmares in the world. After a while, she calmed down, and they fell asleep together in his bed, as often happened in childhood. That night, Katie wasn't troubled by nightmares. Alex, he was flying down the highway in his Ford, pressing the gas pedal with inexplicable rage. Behind him, huge clouds were gathering, and it was as if he was running away from them. Ahead lay springtime Boston, and Mary awaited him there. He didn't care about any silly speed limits. He wanted to see his fiancée as soon as possible. The car's speakers blared heavy rock, but the loud music never distracted him from the road or his thoughts. He hadn't wanted to go home for the weekend. He would have much preferred to spend the holidays with Mary. But he had to tell his family about his relationship with her. And although it wasn't easy, he managed to do it. Thank God. He had convinced his parents that it wasn't just a fleeting infatuation with another girl, but true love. But things were much more complicated with Katie. She reacted rather strangely to his relationship with Mary. Of all things, he didn't expect that from her. Of course, they loved each other, but differently, like siblings. And especially since he had gone to study, everything had changed dramatically. She, too, needed to find some boy. She couldn't follow him around her entire life. In 3 months, she would turn 17. He needed to find her a special gift, Alex decided. Otherwise, the girl was going completely crazy. He glanced in the rearview mirror and was horrified to find that it didn't show his reflection. Alex slammed on the brakes, nearly sending the car into a ditch. Struggling with the steering, he stopped on the shoulder, his body trembling. He looked in the mirror again and this time saw his frightened face. Calming down a bit, Alex continued his journey. This is a sign, a warning. He didn't know where the thought came from, but it didn't leave him for the rest of the trip. About a mile from the city limits, his sedan was pulled over by a police officer for speeding. "Damn, got caught," Alex muttered, handing over his driver's license. He smiled innocently at the officer. The officer peered into his face and asked, "Are you okay, buddy? You don't look so good." "I'm fine." Late at night, they lay in bed after a fantastic lovemaking session. Mary was already asleep, and Alex studied the patterns on the ceiling wallpaper. In the moonlight, they seemed like mysterious hieroglyphs. Sleep wouldn't come to him, and random thoughts filled his head. Alex turned to Mary, and for a moment it seemed to him that Katie was lying next to him, with streams of blood flowing from the corners of her mouth onto the pillow. But as soon as he blinked, Mary was back in front of him. What the hell? He gently touched her face with his fingers, and she woke up immediately. "Is something wrong, dear?" "No, nothing." Alex squeezed her hand and added, "Promise me you'll be careful." "I don't understand. Is something bothering you?" "I don't know, I'm just worried about you." "Okay, I'll be careful." "Thank you. I love you." Days flew by, weeks passed. Alex barely noticed how everything around turned green. All his free time was spent studying. That's the nature of studying at Harvard. One day he decided to call home to check on his family. Dialing the home number, he was suddenly overwhelmed by an inexplicable panic, imagining for a moment that he would be hit with terrible news, that someone in the family had died, or... Alex was about to hang up when Grace's voice came from the receiver. "Hello, I'm listening." "Hi, Mom. It's me, Alex." "Hi, Alex. How are you? You haven't called for so long. Did something happen?" "No, Mom. Everything is fine with me, and with my health and my studies. And if you're interested, Mary is fine too." Alex tried to determine his mother's state by her voice, but it was in vain. "That's good. Very good, but here, not everything is okay." Her voice broke off, and Alex suddenly realized she was struggling to hold back tears. His vision darkened. "What happened, Mom?" "It's about Katie, son. After you left, she got very sick. It's like a paradox. Nature is blooming, but she's withering like a flower without water." "What's wrong with her?" Alex barely held back from shouting. "We don't know for sure. Our family doctor hasn't said anything definite yet. But poor Katie, she has changed so much. She barely eats, sleeps all day, and at night she becomes wild, And oh, Alex, we have to tie her to the bed rails to keep her down. And she snarls, shouting curses at us. God, it's so horrible. I don't understand, Mom. Why haven't you taken her to the hospital yet? The doctor says that in this situation, maybe only a priest or, Alex, she often calls for you in her sleep. Please come as soon as possible. And Alex heard bitter sobs. Mom, don't worry, I'll come home this weekend. Everything will be okay. And unable to talk anymore, he hung up. Before leaving, Alex called his mother once more to clarify his sister Katie's symptoms. During their conversation, he learned that their family doctor, unsure of what to do next, had suggested consulting a priest, suspecting Katie might be possessed. Though Alex didn't believe it, he decided to research possession further. He delved into internet resources and libraries, studying everything he could about the symptoms of possession. After hours of reading and analysis, he decided not to waste any more time and headed to the nearest church. At the church, he was greeted by Father Henry, who listened attentively to his story. The priest explained to Alex about the nature of possession and suggested he acquire a silver cross, which he described as a powerful means of protection. Following Father Henry's advice, Alex purchased a silver cross and wore it around his neck. As he left the church, he felt a mix of skepticism and unease about the unknown ahead. It was harder to believe it all. Well, Mary, it's time to go. They stood in the parking lot near their house. A piercing, cold wind played with their hair with desperate fury. I really want to get there before dark. Be careful, Alex. Mary looked at him cautiously, and Alex regretted once more telling her the whole story. She had enough of her own problems. He gently hugged her and kissed her. Okay. I'll call you when I get there. Bye. He got in the car, and within minutes it was taking him home, where the unknown awaited him. He couldn't get the recent conversation with Priest Henry out of his mind. He had shown up at their apartment's door 2 days ago. Mary had gone to the movies with friends, and Alex decided to browse the internet. Lately, he couldn't find peace and wanted to resolve everything as soon as possible. Focusing on various disease stories, he nearly screamed when the doorbell rang. It can't be said that he was particularly surprised by the priest standing at the door. Rather, he felt a certain inevitability of everything happening, as if he had been expecting his arrival. Hello, Alex. I am Father Henry. You still remember me? We talked in church. He boomed, extending his massive hand. Alex shook it, his hand swallowed by the priest's. You're here about Katie, aren't you? Alex asked. The priest nodded silently, and Alex let him in. Moments later, they were sitting in the living room, and Alex couldn't believe what he was hearing from this holy man. You have to understand me, Alex. I was concerned about your story, and I took the liberty of researching it. What I'm about to tell you may seem like a bedtime story, but you have to believe me, Alex. Your sister is a vampire, and she's not really your sister, at least not by blood. 17 years ago, we tracked down a strange family living in this area. After observing them for a few months, we confirmed that they were vampires. Armed with crosses, crucifixes, and stakes, we attacked them. But unfortunately, the woman with a newborn girl managed to escape. We pursued them for 2 days, and when we caught up, we found the woman without the child. Later, we found out that she had hidden the girl in one of the nearby mansions, specifically in the house where you, Alex, and your parents lived. Are you saying that girl is Katie? You're out of your mind. It sounds terrible, I understand. But you just need to listen to me and then trust your heart. I hope it will tell you the right thing to do. Okay, go on, Alex said, his voice low. Father Henry pulled out old, decrepit manuscripts from his bag and continued. Their lineage goes back to a certain Gregory, a ruthless knight. These manuscripts say that Gregory was known for his exceptional cruelty, preying on innocent people. When his warlord found out that Gregory drank the blood of his victims, he banished him, and the church excommunicated him. There are many different legends and stories about vampires, but they all have one thing in common. They always feed on blood, making them spawns of the devil, and they have no place in this world. I'm sorry, but I've lived with Katie for many years, and never once saw her drink anyone's blood. According to the legend of this vampire, before taking his own life, Gregory killed his 6 sons, leaving only his 17-year-old daughter alive, forcing her to drink the blood of her brothers. Thus, he passed on his curse to her by blood and lineage. Since then, only the girl became a vampire, and the transformation process began when she neared 17 years of age. But to continue the lineage, she needs a suitable mate, and this time it's you, Alex. But we won't let that happen. So, you're suggesting that, yes, Alex, you have to kill this devil's spawn before she turns 17 and gains full power. At this, Alex couldn't take it anymore, and jumping from the chair, ordered the priest to leave the apartment. I won't listen to this madness anymore, and I certainly won't kill my sister. Go away before I report you to the police. Okay, I'll leave, but think of your fiancé, your parents, they're in danger. If you need to find me, here's my phone number. The priest left, and Alex was alone with his crazy thoughts. He had a choice to make, but first he planned to go home and sort things out there. Blood for blood. Turning off the car engine in the driveway, Alex parked in front of his house. Although it wasn't dark yet, bright lights shone in almost all the windows. He found Katie's room's window and was suddenly seized by a chill. What if the priest is right? He thought, can I kill? Suddenly, fear gripped him, and he felt as if he were chained to the driver's seat. Later, he couldn't explain exactly what had happened to him or how long this paralysis had lasted. It had already grown dark outside the car, and Alex continued to sit, staring blankly at the light in the window. Only the blood-curdling scream of terror coming from the house snapped him out of it, and he realized that the scream belonged to his mother. If you had told Jonathan a few weeks ago that he would have to strap his daughter to the bed, he would have laughed and sent that lunatic packing. But now he wasn't laughing. Now, every evening with the onset of darkness, he tearfully tightened the straps on Katie's hands and feet, and he figured that soon this would not be enough to hold his daughter because her strength was growing. He feared this. He couldn't imagine her harming them. But in her eyes, he saw only hatred and thirst. That morning, Jonathan woke up with a bad feeling, and it stayed with him all day. But he tried to ignore it. All his thoughts were focused on how Katie would react to Alex's arrival. He went up to the 2nd floor. In front of Katie's room, Dr. Harrison, who had been living with them for some time, was breathing heavily. Sighing deeply, the doctor sympathetically patted Jonathan on the shoulder. Katie lay on the bed, neither alive nor dead, her eyelids lowered but her eyeballs moving rapidly beneath them. Jonathan did the usual procedure with the straps and approached Grace. I hope Alex arrives before she... I hope so too. I don't want him to see her in this terrible state. They stood there fearfully looking at their daughter. Suddenly, Katie's eyelids lifted, and bloodshot eyes stared at them. Growling gutturally, Katie tried to break free from the tightened straps. Her body, dressed in a white nightgown, rose from the bed, revealing her thin shoulders, and her mouth twisted into a contemptuous grimace. Sharp fangs emerged from the corners of her upper lip. "Untie me," she hissed in a voice that wasn't hers. Ignoring their daughter's threats, Jonathan heard strange sounds from the hallway. and then it hit him that they had forgotten to lock up their pet, Roger. Just as he moved to shut the door, the dog darted past the people trying to catch him and jumped onto Katie's chest, licking her face unsuspectingly. At this time, Katie made another attempt to free her hands, and this time she succeeded. What Jonathan had feared happened. The straps had given way. Greedily glancing at Roger, she grabbed the dog's neck with incredible cruelty and easily tore his head off. The head hit the wall with a dull thud, leaving a bloody mark, and a torrent of blood gushed from the convulsing body's neck. Katie greedily latched on to the monstrous fountain. Then Jonathan was deafened by his wife's piercing scream, and before his heart clamped in a vice and he collapsed to the floor, he saw the satisfaction in his daughter's eyes and understood what she had become. Getting out of the car, Alex glanced at the clock on the dashboard and was shocked to see that he had sat motionless for almost an hour. Trying not to trip over the hood, he rushed toward the house. Thank God the door was unlocked, and within seconds, confirming the scream came from the second floor, Alex sprinted upstairs. The scene before his eyes was unimaginable even in the worst nightmare. His father lay on the floor, clutching his heart, with Dr. Harrison trying to help him. His mother stood in another corner of the room. But seeing his sister, nausea instantly rose to his throat. Katie knelt with disheveled hair, a headless Roger in her left hand. Opening her blood-stained mouth where Alex noticed clumps of dog hair, she spoke in a barely audible voice. Opening her blood-stained mouth where Alex noticed clumps of dog hair, she spoke in a barely audible voice. Alex, you... And saying nothing more, fell unconscious onto the bed. How is she, doctor? Sleeping. I gave her a double dose of sedative. How are you? Do you need help? No, I'm fine. They were in the living room. Alex stood with his back against the wall, having managed to calm down a bit, though his heart was still pounding in his chest. About an hour ago, an ambulance had taken his father to the hospital. Fortunately, he had only a minor heart attack and should recover soon. His mother had gone with him. Dr. Harrison had said they needed rest after everything they had gone through. I know you've been talking to a priest named Henry, the doctor said suddenly. You shouldn't be so surprised. Yes, I know him. You know I've been your family's doctor for a very long time, and as you understand, I knew that Katie wasn't a biological child. About 6 months after your parents found the baby wrapped in dirty blankets at the doorstep, Father Henry found me and told me this crazy story about vampires. At first I didn't believe him, being a man of science. But over time, observing your sister, I began to notice some abnormalities in her development. Gradually I started to believe the priest's words, as horrible as they were. Yes, it's all horrible. Will you find him? I want him to come tomorrow. Maybe there's no other way. Okay, Alex. I'll do everything I can. The next day turned into a mad nightmare for Alex. Later, he couldn't say with certainty what had been a dream and what had been reality. He woke up in the living room around 3 in the afternoon. Going to sleep, he had no doubt that he wouldn't be able to sleep that night. But as soon as he closed his eyes, he felt himself sinking into the depths of sleep, and within minutes, he was peacefully asleep, dreamless. Getting up from the couch, he felt unbearable pain in his head, as if it was splitting apart. Walking to the kitchen in hopes of finding some painkillers, he stopped by the window and looked outside. A real storm was raging there. The wind battered the window with incredible force, threatening to shatter it, and the sky was covered with dark storm clouds, promising nothing good. After swallowing a couple of aspirin tablets with a glass of warm water, he decided to call Dr. Harrison, but dialing his number, he only heard the operator's voice saying the subscriber was temporarily unavailable. Damned connection. Probably down because of the storm. Alex pressed the end button and lay back down on the couch. The pain in his head had subsided considerably, and before he knew it, he fell asleep again. He was woken by a thunderous knock on the door. He opened his eyes to pitch darkness. God, how long did I sleep? Staggering, he made his way to the door. On the doorstep stood the rain-soaked priest and doctor, and Alex immediately let them in. Father Henry had brought everything necessary for the vampire-killing ritual. First, he took a bottle from his worn bag and sprinkled everyone present with holy water. Removing the cross from his chest, he handed it to the doctor. Then he reached into the bag again and pulled out a sharpened wooden stake, handing it to Alex. "Take it. This is the weapon of our Lord." Alex reluctantly took the stake and almost whispered to the priest, "Before we go upstairs, I want to know one thing. Ask, my son. Tell me, did Katie's biological parents ever kill people?" Father Henry, lowering his eyes, hesitated for a moment, and Alex noticed some doubt on the priest's face. But then Dr. Harrison broke the silence. "We need to go. I'm afraid we're running out of time. And yet I must know. Yes, Alex, they killed many people." As they climbed the stairs, no one spoke, and only the creaking floorboards broke the silence. Entering Katie's room, Alex turned on the light. Katie lay in the same position they had left her in the night before. Listening to her light breathing, he approached her right side of the bed with Dr. Harrison standing to the left, clutching the cross given by the priest. Father Henry stood opposite Katie and began to recite a prayer. Alex looked at his sister and suddenly noticed her face contorting. And then his whole life flashed before his eyes. He remembered all the joyful and sad moments associated with Katie and realized how much he loved his sister. He couldn't believe he was about to kill her. But he understood that Katie's soul was dead, and on the bed lay only her beautiful body with a monster inside that had no place in this world. And just as he raised the stake to strike her heart, the window behind him shattered, and he felt tiny shards of broken glass embed in his back and head. A sudden gust of wind burst into the room, scattering the pages of the prayer book in the priest's hands. But Father Henry continued to recite the prayer loudly. Suddenly the chandelier above them went out, and in the flash of lightning Alex saw Katie open her eyes and, with a blood-curdling scream, pounce on the priest. Her sharp fangs sank into the priest's neck, and Alex staggered back to the shattered window, unable to move, watching in horror. He saw the doctor trying to help the priest, but Katie easily pushed him back against the wall, and he collapsed unconscious to the floor. Father Henry tried to break free from the deadly grip of the vampire, but the struggle was unequal. Unable to bear the squelching sounds of blood being sucked any longer, Alex covered his ears with his hands and sat on the floor. Satiated, Katie pushed the lifeless body of the priest away from her, and Alex saw her blossom, like a night flower in full moonlight. She no longer seemed a young teenager to him. Before him stood a healthy, beautiful woman in full bloom. This is what human blood can do. "My blood parents are avenged." She smiled with a bloody smile and approached Alex. "Stay away from me," he said, trembling as he picked up the stake from the floor and held it out in front of him. Katie stopped and laughed loudly. "Do you really think I want to kill you, Alex? I love you." "I doubt you're capable of love." His voice trembled, and he couldn't help it. "Ha ha ha. That priest brainwashed you. I'm sure he told you a lot about creatures like us. But he didn't tell you that the line between good and evil is very thin, and it still needs to be determined who's on which side. Katie, I loved you too, but now I don't know who to believe, and I saw what you did to him." He got what he deserved. Katie's pale face was shadowed by endless sadness, and Alex suddenly realized she was telling the truth, and the priest had lied to him about the murders of people. "Alex, you can become like me too. I can make it quick and painless, and then we can live together forever." Silence fell. Katie seemed to glide toward him, her cold fingers brushing his face. They gazed into each other's eyes for a long time. Alex pondered her words, and he believed them. Deep inside, he yearned for eternal life, yearned for this beautiful woman standing before him. But his conscience whispered otherwise, asking if he truly wanted such a life. No, he would rather die when his time came. And besides, there was Mary, who awaited and loved him. "No, Katie, I'm sorry, but I can't. You have to understand." "I see. I can tell by your eyes. I'm very sorry you made this choice, but know that I will love only you for all my life." She turned toward the window and, like a butterfly, disappeared into the night. They never saw each other again. After the events of that horrific night, Alex and his parents struggled to cope with the loss of Katie. They couldn't come to terms with what had happened, each of them bearing the pain and regret in their hearts. Grace and Jonathan often reminisced about their daughter, her smile, her ringing laughter, and even her oddities, which now seemed like mere childish pranks. Alex, too, was tormented by memories. But eventually, with the support of his fiancée, Mary, he began to find solace. The years went by and the wounds gradually healed. Alex and Mary got married, and their union was strong and filled with love. They had 2 adorable children who became the center of their lives. Many years passed. Alex became a successful writer, Mary worked at a prestigious school, and their children brought joy to their parents with their accomplishments. One day, they decided to take a trip to France to show their children the beauty of Europe and acquaint them with the country's rich history. They strolled through the streets of Paris, enjoying a warm summer evening. Alex held his daughter's hand while Mary held their son's. The city was full of life, sounds, and aromas. They laughed and took photos in front of the Eiffel Tower, tried fresh croissants, and enjoyed the moment. One evening, while they were walking through Montmartre, Alex suddenly noticed a familiar figure among the crowd. He froze, not believing his eyes. Katie. She was walking beside a tall man, holding the hand of a little girl who looked remarkably like Katie did as a child. Alex couldn't take his eyes off his sister. She looked wonderful, exuding calm and happiness. Katie noticed him too. Their eyes met, and Alex felt his heart stop for a moment. But instead of approaching and greeting him, Katie simply smiled at him. It was a warm and reassuring smile, full of understanding and forgiveness. She walked past him without stopping, soon disappearing from sight with the man and the little girl. Alex stood motionless, realizing that this wasn't just a chance encounter. It was a sign that Katie was all right. He understood that she had found her place in the world, that she was happy. Alex's heart filled with relief and peace. He knew he could finally let go of the past. Approaching his family, Alex hugged Mary and the children, feeling an extraordinary warmth and love. He didn't tell them about meeting Katie, deciding to keep this memory in his heart. It was their little secret, a sign that even in the darkest world, one can find light.